Cancer Alley and environmental racism.
This is what has been referred to as Cancer Alley, the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans.
You don't know what's a cloud and what's smoke.
The flares are really not bad, and people don't seem to understand that.
Are they breathing the same air?
The area between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Louisiana is one of the most polluted areas of the United States because of the dense cluster of oil, petrochemical, and chemical facilities. Most of the people who live here are African Americans. Some are poor descendants of plantations living in towns that are scapegoats for industry profits. This area is known as Cancer Alley, the forefront of environmental racism. In 1987, residents of St. Gabriel, Louisiana realized that there was an increased amount of cancer cases in their neighborhood. This lone neighborhood found similarities in neighboring communities. The cases of cancer stretches approximately 85 miles from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, a corridor that is home to nearly 130 chemical plants and refineries. The industry named it the Chemical Corridor, but those who are affected named it Cancer Alley. Environmental racism is environmental injustices against marginalized racial minorities and poor individuals. Most of these individuals are subjected to disproportionate contact with pollutants or are denied access to clean air and or water. People of color and low-income individuals are more likely to live near sources of contamination or environmental harm. Majority of the time, these individuals have these pollutants forced upon them. Many of the residents of Cancer Alley are poor and African American. People of color must deal with dirty air and dirty drinking water, being forced to live near toxic facilities and landfills. Most of these issues are exacerbated by racism. In the past, this area was mainly plantations, and after the liberation of slaves, the African American community had nowhere to go. They stayed in familiar communities with neighbors who understood their situation. However, now in the 21st century, we find that these communities bear the brunt of environmental crimes. In 2002, Louisiana had the second highest death rate from cancer. At the time, the national average was 206 deaths per 100,000. Louisiana's rate was 237.3 deaths per 100,000. In an effort to cover their actions, corporations would buy out neighborhoods. However, since these facilities flourished in this area, homes were essentially worthless. Houses lost tremendous value because of the pollution from these plants. These individuals could not move if they sold their homes since they would not get much in return. Thus, most of them stayed waiting out the rest of their lives like a death sentence. Marginalized individuals and people of color face injustices every day, even environmental injustices. Some are forced to accept these toxic facilities into their communities because they need jobs to provide for their families. However, they should not have to choose between feeding their families or working in toxic environments. A latent consequence of these facilities is increased crime rates. With declining health rates and the desolate neighborhoods these communities are forced to live in, we can expect to find individuals turning to crime to help their families get by. The environment is also a victim. The Mississippi River is well known as a wetland. Wetlands are vital to the health of any ecosystem. They reduce impacts of floods, are natural aquifers, and important sites of biodiversity. When toxic waste is released into the air and water, the surrounding ecosystem will be damaged. Air pollution can travel to other areas and water pollution will move downstream. The air pollution in this area carries toxic fumes that can increase cancer growth. Not only that, but pollution in waters affect the lives of humans and non-human animals. Non-human animals may be able to survive some small changes, but if they ingest any chemicals, then it will move up the food chain through bioaccumulation. This can cause serious damage to those who depend on the water for their food resources. Bioaccumulation is the collection of substances in an organism over time. An example can be the increased levels of mercury in fish over a 10-year period. Biomagnification is the increased levels of substances or pollutants from lower levels of a food chain to higher levels of a food chain. An example of this can be higher levels of mercury in polar bears due to eating contaminated fish. Biomagnification is a consequence of bioaccumulation. These two topics are important because of the toxic waste that is dumped into the Mississippi River. If aquatic life continues to ingest these chemicals, we can see increased incidence of bioaccumulation. This can lead to biomagnification in human species, as those in this area hunt for fish. This can in turn cause cancer in individuals. This can be a latent cause for some cancer cases. Even if this is not a direct consequence of pollution via chemical facilities, this is a prime example of latent consequences of environmental crime. These facilities dump toxic waste into waters, then the fish ingest these chemicals. The population of this area eat the fish and will ingest these chemicals. This is another way that these chemical facilities harm those surrounding them. There's not just one victim, but many victims in any environmental crime. Individuals can get harmed, like those who live in Cancer Alley, and ecosystems can get harmed, like the Mississippi River. You hear a lot about groups advocating for developing nations. We are able to advocate for those in other countries, yet we are not fighting for those who are our neighbors. They are firm believers of NIMBY, aka not in my backyard. However, we need to realize that any environmental crime can lead to greater disasters like climate change.